We're squabbling about lockdowns. The governor of Maine threatens to arrest people for having lunch in public. Police in New York tackle and assault citizens for going outside. That's the debate in this country. That's not the debate in China. Why? Because the Chinese government has bigger plans. By the time this pandemic has played out, China plans to rule the world. So for the West, the coronavirus has been a bewildering disaster that we'll be recovering from for a long time. But for the Chinese government, which thinks long term, the whole thing has been a blessing. In fact, they believe it's the beginning of a new Chinese century. Sharri Markson is the national political editor at the Daily Telegraph in Australia. She joins us live from Sydney tonight. It's her report, by the way, that has formed the basis of the script you just heard. Sharri, thanks so much for coming on tonight. It's an amazing piece of journalism that you turned out, and I'm ashamed that no one in America beat you to it, so congratulations on that. As you step back from it, what do you think it says? What's the kind of overview of it?
Look, it's very clear from this 15-page dossier that's been prepared by concerned Western governments that China deliberately covered up evidence of the virus early on in a pure case of negligence, and this has directly contributed to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people getting sick and dying the world over. These are just the facts that the dossier lays out, and you know, this isn't ideology, this isn't propaganda, these are just the facts.
What's so compelling
and if you look
about...
at the
I'm sorry, please continue.
No, if you look at the detail of it, you know, it divides it into 5 main themes, this dossier. And if you just go through it all, you know, this is a serious case of cover-up by China of one of the most deadly pandemic outbreaks we've had in you know, at least a century. And it's directly because they didn't take action. You know, they knew there was human-to-human transmission as early as December 6. That's according to this dossier, when the first evidence emerged of it. And yet it wasn't until January 20 when they finally admitted that COVID-19 could be transmitted from one person to another. That was just far too late, and that is why so many people the world over are now sick and dying.
This is the most substantial confirmation of what we suspected that we've had so far, and because it's a multinational effort, I think it would be hard to dismiss it as a political document. What has the reaction been in Australia to this?
Look, we displayed it prominently. My newspaper, the Daily Telegraph, it's a News Corp paper. It's the biggest selling daily newspaper. We put it on our front page. We had 6 pages of coverage inside on Saturday, and it has been followed up around the world. Everyone is taking this very seriously because it's not supported, as you say, by you know, political angles. It's supported by facts. Everything that's contained in this document is factual. But again, in Australia, like in the US, there are, of course, those left-wing sections of the media that don't want to believe that this virus may have leaked from a laboratory. And of course, we don't know that yet. That's being investigated, but they don't want to even think about it. So, you know, already there have been attacks from that angle here as well.
Well, I hate to ask a reporter to speculate, but it's such a fascinating question that I can't resist. Why do you think there's a resistance to deal with the facts? So if you were to assemble the facts on, you know, about where it came from, you'd have to say, just objectively, that the evidence suggests it came from a lab somehow. Why is that hard for people, would you imagine?
You know, when you look at, you know, the argument is that there's no evidence, firm evidence that it came from a lab, but there's no firm evidence it came from a wet market either. And what this dossier shows is that the Chinese authorities disinfected the wet lab. They bleached it before taking adequate environmental samples that could have perhaps verified or gone to verifying their case that it came from the wet market. And while a lot of viruses have come from wet markets, in this case you have it coming from Wuhan, where there are 2 laboratories that deal in deadly pathogens. One of the laboratories, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, was actually working on bat-like coronaviruses, and they were actually manipulating and genetically modifying bat-like coronaviruses to make them even more deadly. This is their own study, their own research into this, and it's documented in this dossier, and I've read the original studies as well. And Shi Zhengli, who's now become known as the Batwoman, she's one of the leading virologists and head of this unit. In that study, she herself states that this work, or or the study's conclusion states that this work is so dangerous that the risk of it is that it could lead to a pandemic. And when the outbreak first happened, she herself has given media interviews where she said she had sleepless nights worrying that the virus, that the outbreak came from her laboratory. She then says she studied all of the various samples she had, and we don't know for sure how many she has, but she has a lot of different deadly pathogens and virus samples of coronaviruses. She says she studied them and it wasn't a genetic match. But given that China has lied, and it's just a fact, they have lied about everything to do with this virus so far, how can we take her word for it? There needs to be an investigation.
And we can. Meanwhile, our authorities are saying we know conclusively that it was not manipulated, and that's a lie. We don't know that it was manipulated. We don't know conclusively that it wasn't. Anyone who tells you that we know that conclusively is lying. There's a lot of lying. But your piece is a blow against lying, and so I'm so grateful that you wrote it and that your paper ran it. Sharri, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on.